Hi, folks, this is the Fighting Nerd and his co-host, Jolly Roger. Once again, we are not filming ourselves, so you will have to take our word that we're us and we're here. What I want to do today is share with you the 10 movies that I watch every year around Halloween as my personal Halloween tradition. Halloween tradition, that is. These are films that I just like personally. They're B movies to a large extent. Some of them are even TV movies. But what they all have in common is that they have good stories and they're not dependent on a lot of special effects and gore. And a lot of times the special effects are cheesy. What I look for in my horror movies are something that's based in actual history or at least in folklore and have a good story. There's no zombie movies in it. I don't, and there's not going to ever be a zombie movie in my Halloween list. And there are no slasher movies in it. These are horror movies that rely on story and atmosphere to get the thrills and the scares. They're rather obscure. I didn't go for the really big name Hollywood movies, so these may be some movies that the younger people may not even be aware of. So here we go with number one. This is Spectre, starring Robert Culp and Gig Young. This was actually produced by Gene Roddenberry in 1975 as a pilot film for a series. The series never went into production, but the movie is quite good. It is the story of Robert Culp, a paranormal investigator and demonologist who winds up being cursed and having to go to do battle with the demon Asmodeus, who has inhabited a British noble. And they have to literally go into the devil's house, the castle, to discover the source of the curse and put Asmodeus to rest. And again, this was a TV movie in 1977, not 1975, but in 1977. So the special effects are, what there are of them, aren't very good. This was relied on the actors' performances, a good solid story, and atmosphere. And this is just one of those movies that I think is what a horror movie should be, because it lets your own imagination do the work. But it is based on some demon lore and mythic lore, which is something I really enjoy in my horror movies. And the next one is Gargoyles from 1972, starring Cornel Wilde. And this is another movie that was made on a shoestring budget, but for the money that they had and what this movie is, the makeup effects for the gargoyles are incredible. Now there's a kind of a lot of cheesy slow motion and everything, but the story is solid. And again, for what it is, for value, the production values are very good, and it engages you in a good solid story where you get to care about the characters and therefore what happens to them. It doesn't get bloody and it doesn't do all the different special effects, but it just tells the story of a scientist who comes across the fact that gargoyles are real. He's a folklorist. Of course, doesn't believe it. His daughter winds up getting captured by the gargoyles. Chaos and mayhem ensues, but it's a very effective little thriller. And again, kind of obscure, but well worth the hour and a half, 2 hours it takes to watch it. And then we have Salem's Lot, and this is the earlier version with David Soul and James Mason, who actually steals the show. I believe this was the 1979 version, not the Rob Lowe version. But James Mason is just so creepy as the vampire's human servant in this particular movie. Now, this is a mini-series. You probably won't watch it in one sitting, but you can, I suppose. And it tells the story of a writer who had a horrible experience at a certain house at his hometown in Salem's Lot, and left there as a child. He comes back to write a book about Salem's Lot and the history of it, and finds out that the town is slowly being overrun by vampires, and of course feels compelled to stop it. And this is a really moody movie, and the suspense builds to a crescendo as all the people that you really like slowly wind up being turned into vampires. David Soul really makes his character work. Geoffrey Lewis also has a very, very good performance in one really creepy scene in the rocking chair. But this is just a good, solid Halloween-type movie that you can go through several bowls of popcorn watching with no problem. Very effective. Very good movie. And this is probably the best movie of the bunch. The Devil's Bride, I understand it's also known as The Devil Rides Out. This is Christopher Lee in one of his rare times when he got to play a good guy. He plays an occult expert and paranormal investigator who is helping a longtime friend and kind of a ward who is involved with the satanic cult that is trying to bring Satan into this world. It's a very intense movie. I probably wouldn't let your kids watch it, even though there's no gore or anything in it, just because of the way the actors play it and some of the subject matters. It's probably not a good one for kids to watch, but it has that enough of a veneer of actual science and occult lore and things like that, parapsychology, that it grounds the really supernatural stuff in something that at least you can convince yourself is real. And the climax of the movie is really incredible. And of course, Christopher Lee is great in anything he does. Well worth the time to watch this movie. I think this is the most modern movie in my list here. This is Warlock. This is the first in the series of Warlock movies. The rest of them, quite frankly, sucked, but this one is good. Again, it's grounded in folklore and history of the Salem witch trials. Julian Sand nails his performance as the villain. Laurie Singer is the protagonist of the movie, and also does extremely well. And this is a pretty fast-paced movie. There is some gory special effects in it, but they don't overuse them, and they don't use the special effects to drive the movie. The real driving force behind this movie is Julian Sands. And I don't know the actor who plays him, but also the witch hunter Redford is very good. And this is another one where it has some disturbing scenes, particularly with violence perpetrated against children. It's not actually showed, but it is very definitely implied. So that can be a little disturbing. But it builds suspense. It keeps the tension going. Has a lot of good moments between the Redford character and Laurie Singer's character. Again, it's fast-paced, but it builds the suspense, and it keeps you guessing. Like I said, the sequels that came along were pretty much worthless, but this first one is definitely one of my favorite films when it comes to horror films. And next we have The Tingler with the immortal, the great, the stupendous Vincent Price. Now, this isn't just another little film where I understand that in some cases as a gimmick, when they played this in the theaters back in the day, they actually put little vibrators under the seats in the theaters. And there's a scene in the movie where the Tingler, which is a kind of a centipede from hell, gets loose and is crawling around in a theater. And I guess they would really scare the crap out of people when they're watching this movie and there's a Tingler supposed to be crawling around in a movie theater, and then all of a sudden your seat vibrates underneath you. Imagine. But the The action is really intense. Vincent Price's character is likable, even though he's kind of a ruthless prick in this movie. Do anything to prove his little pet scientific theory, and endanger not only himself, but really doesn't mind killing folks in order to find what's going on, just as long as he doesn't get caught. This is really a classic horror movie. Like I said, it's a little gimmicky, but it is just something that kind of makes you think about the nature of fear, and just Vincent Price. You can't go wrong with Vincent Price. He can scare you to death and make you laugh yourself silly in the same movie, and he does it with style. This is a Witchmaker. This is also called The Legend of Witch Hollow. Now, despite what it says about the whole sex thing after this, it might have been racy back in, I think, 1966 when they made it, but it's pretty tame when it comes to sex by today's standards. But again, this goes into, at least makes an attempt to do witchy lore and a little bit of history. It's about a group of parapsychologists researching ESP. And the kind of the protagonist and the MacGuffin in the movie is a very attractive female psychic who is the subject of their studies, but who also becomes the focus of attention for a warlock who wants to use her as a consort and corrupt her and take her psychic powers and make her into a witch and bring her over to the side of Satan. Probably, not a good one for your kids to watch. There are some scenes in there that would be questionable for them. And like I said, in 1966, it might have been considered like really racy, but not anymore. But again, it's just a good, effective horror movie, which just uses mood and atmosphere more than special effects to scary. And the guy playing the warlock absolutely nails it. He is creepy. I bet you they had a hard time being around him when they were making that movie, because he really nailed the creepy, perverted warlock thing. This is Spellbinder, probably the weakest in the movie in the list. But again, it makes some attempt at legitimizing your suspension of disbelief with some of the rituals and stuff that are involved. It looks like they might have spent at least 15 minutes doing research, which is more than a lot of these movies make. Tim Daly from the old Wings sitcom, and I think he's on Madam Secretary now, does a good job as a protagonist who gets involved against this cult of evil witches, a coven of evil witches, that just make his life hell. They try to kill him, of course. And it's just a nice, effective, supernatural thriller. And like I said, probably the weakest of the bunch, but still, it keeps you interested throughout the entire movie, and there is some thought behind it. And probably the most original movie in this list, and maybe, I would say, one of the most original movies I've ever seen. There's no real supernatural elements to this. This is just about one really messed up dude. The creepy part of this is he actually finds, the whole thing begins when a man finds out that his father had a winning lottery ticket, but didn't want to give it up, and actually took it to the grave. And his son digs up his recently deceased father's grave to claim the ticket, and what he sees in that grave scares him so much that his face actually freezes in the horrified look he had when he screamed that he saw his father's presumably rotting corpse. No gore, just a lot of mood and atmosphere. And the lead actor in Mr. Sardonicus is just captivating. He really makes you believe he's evil, and that is a fact. This is kind of a twist ending. Incidentally, this is from the same director as The Tingler, so it's got that same kind of feel. And that's about it. As I said, these movies may not be the greatest movies ever made, but I think they all have the advantages that they don't rely on gore, they don't rely on a lot of special effects. They tell stories and they keep you engaged throughout the movie. And that's what I like in any movie, but particularly in a horror movie. I don't like slasher movies. Slasher movies to me aren't horror movies. They're just a pointless waste of time. So I never liked Michael Myers or anything like that. But these movies, I think, you settle in for a Halloween movie marathon. By the end of this, you will have eaten all your junk food. Your kids will have gone to sleep after working off their sugar high that they got during their trick-or-treating. And a wonderful time will be had by all. So remember, what words make history. This is The Fighting Nerd, and I'm out of here.